Welcome to another edition of Ask Isaiah. I'm Isaiah Rhodes, and on today's episode, I have the freelance teacher, Doug Marola. On this episode, we're going to speak about everything going on around the NBA. It's around the first couple of weeks. We're about 8 or 9 games in, so there's a lot going on in the NBA, especially in La La Land with LeBron James and this new young nucleus he has. So just before we get into anything, Mr. Marola, how have you digested the game so far this season, and what have you been paying attention to most and foremost?
To be honest, I had a couple of young students at work talk to me about the NBA, and one young man said that Denver was a surprise, and I said, I don't know if Denver counts as a surprise because if that's a surprise to you, it's the least surprising surprise. What I liked was he talked about he talked about that they're is that you?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, that's all right. He talked about their team being one of the best in the West. And
Right.
So I thought we had gotten away from the NBA Western Conference is completely dominant and the East is a doormat. And I think we've gotten away from that to some degree. It's not as egregious as it used to be, but the NBA Western Conference is so good that a team like Denver, which in a normal year would really do well and would be considered this up-and-coming exciting team, takes a backseat to LeBron's Lakers, to the coronation of the Golden State Warriors as fourth title in 5 years.
Right.
Are we already putting that in the books?
Well, I'm not, but I think they are the prohibited favorite by a long shot.
Right.
By a very wide margin, yes.
What I'm watching, and it's been talked about a lot. I listen to Zach Lowe's podcast a fair amount because he has good guests, and the Boston Celtics are a very unique scenario. I was telling this student of mine, I said, in 20 games from now, the Celtics will start doing win 7 in a row, lose 1. Win 4 in a row, lose 2. Win 8 in a row, lose 1. I think that they are going to gel, and they are going to be the prohibitive favorite in the East. But that's where I'm at so far. Unlike last year, we haven't had any major injuries to change things too much. But the Celtics, to me, are like a science experiment.
Well, I think to your point about the East not seeming like a foregone conclusion, I think a lot of that has to do with LeBron going west, and in doing so, it's an open vacancy for anyone at this point. I mean, like you said about Boston and their depth, their experience, they will be the prohibitive favorite in the East. But I feel like there's a space for any team at this point to try to go for that spot in terms of Eastern Conference supremacy, because while LeBron was there, he casted a large shadow on any team that might have been up and coming. You would say things like, Toronto's having a great season, but can they beat LeBron? Boston is exceptional. They have great depth. But are they good enough to beat LeBron?
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee has one of the best young superstars in the league right now. But is he dominant enough to compete against LeBron?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, even though Boston is a prohibitive favorite, they haven't won an Eastern Conference championship. They didn't defeat LeBron, and they weren't the team to knock him off in the sense to where he lost and then went west. He won and vacated his title to go and challenge himself in New Horizons. So if you're Toronto, while that shadow is gone, you feel like you upgraded in a way where you can get Kawhi and you can challenge Boston. If you're Milwaukee, you still have a lot to improve on, but you have probably the best player in the East. So you should feel like you can compete. And to Milwaukee's credit, they lost their first game of the season last night to Boston in a highly competitive game.
Mm-hmm.
It was 115-113. Boston, in my opinion, they dominated the early parts of the game, but it almost mirrored last year's playoffs in the sense where, as much as Boston was the better team, they couldn't separate from Giannis Antetokounmpo and his dominance. So I think in terms of the East, it's more wide open than it's ever been.
Yeah, you're probably right. And Milwaukee caught me by surprise with what they're doing. And I think, though, with a team like Boston, I remember a couple of years ago, they were talking about Atlanta being the San Antonio Spurs of the East.
Right.
And
Mike Budenholzer, a great coach.
yeah, yes.
Someone that, from an offensive perspective, the way he's able to provide balance. I think the difference with not to cut you off. I think the difference with Milwaukee compared to that Atlanta team is that they didn't have a truly dominant player. So it was more easier to infuse a lot of those Spurs principles to that Atlanta team because they needed each other to be cohesive.
Right.
When you have an overly dominant player, while you want to have everyone involved, it's human nature to rely on the more dominant player. And I think for Giannis, he's at a very young age in a sense where he's not set in his ways offensively to where you can't teach him. I think Budenholzer can elevate him and try to tap into different facets of his game in that manner.
Yeah, and so now you have what could be, because I've been saying for a couple of years now that the Celtics are the Spurs of the East. They've got the same coach, they've got the same GM, they have the same system, they've drafted well. They're not going to get a top pick now for a couple of years, right? They had those picks. They've basically fleeced the Nets organization and built their team off of trading away Joe Johnson and Kevin Garnett. Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett.
Right.
But what happened was, now if the Bucks hold on to Giannis and continue to advance, you now have two potential quote unquote Spurs of the East. I think Boston's better at it so far because they've got a longer record, but of improvement. But you've got now, because Milwaukee coming out of nowhere, I don't know who picked the Bucks to start off 7-1. I know I didn't.
Right. Even though, this is a shameless plug, but if you go back to my Ask Isaiah podcast of my Eastern Conference projections, I felt like because of Budenholzer's arrival, I felt Milwaukee would be much more inclined to have a year similar to what Indiana had last year and battle for a top 4 seed, because I felt Milwaukee, as I mentioned, they challenged Boston in last year's playoffs. It went 7 games. I think a lot of their turmoil came from the changeover at coach. As much as Jason Kidd developed Giannis and developed that team and tried to make them get the most out of them, I think the power struggle with ownership and Jason caused some friction in terms of how he actually coached the team down the stretch of not just last year but the year before. So with that, they had to revamp and try to go in a different direction. Even though when Jason was fired, Giannis tried everything he can to try to change the ownership's decision because he's so connected to Jason in a way where he actually developed his game.
Right.
But for what they are now, for what they are at this point, I should say, because we're not even 10 games in, but what they've shown is that defensively they're extremely long. They have versatility that can mirror Boston defensively. The only issue that I have with Milwaukee that they're still trying to figure out is, as good as Giannis is as a scorer and as dominant as he is in terms of creating opportunities for others, he still struggles in the half court at times. A team like Boston, similar to Boston, can emphasize your flaws in a way where you have to bring a counter at them. If you don't have the requisite adjustments or in-game adjustments to counter what they're doing, they will exploit you every time.
Yes, you'll get destroyed. Right. Totally true. Yeah, it's quite amazing to watch, and that's the thing with these. Someone had mentioned the other day on one of these. I think it was one of the podcasts I listened to, how amazing the Spurs are, having adjusted both on the court, off the court, and have consistency and change personnel. That what they've done, we really have to recognize it's been since 1997 that
Right.
the franchise has been a threat to win it all practically every year. I mean, that's completely unheard of
I mean,
in
honestly,
sports.
I mean, for me, they mirror what the Patriots are in
Mm-hmm.
terms of
Yes.
how their system, they're able to incorporate anyone to reflect the times. They adjust with the times in a way where if you go back to the late 90s and early 2000s when the game was bogged down defensively, you had
Mm-hmm.
to play a half-court game. They had the perfect matchups for that. They had two big men that can dominate inside. You had some shooters outside, and they focused on defense. As the game advanced and it went to more offense oriented, he was able to adopt a more European style and get Manu Ginobili, Tony Parkers of the world, Boris Diaw to emphasize passing and get open shooters the ball, still with the focus on dunking as at the foundation, but to build outside of that. Then
Mm-hmm.
in Duncan's advanced years, you bring in Kawhi, a young player who potentially could be the forebearer of the franchise after. But I think the challenge there became as much as you're insulated in the Spurs way. For Kawhi, he wanted to be more individual and go about things a different way, and
Mm-hmm.
that might at a certain time, as much as they did develop Kawhi, he became his own entity outside of the Spurs. So
Yes.
they had to go a different way.
And this
But
is unprecedented. They lost their key guy. I mean, that's not supposed to happen.
I
And,
mean, but
they recovered.
to your point about how they recovered, I think bringing it's all about a timing thing. To bring in DeMar DeRozan the way that they did, and they actually put Kawhi in a prosperous situation. A lot of teams would say, okay, you'll go somewhere, but you are going to suffer. To go to Toronto, a team on the cusp of winning, they put him in a position where he would be the man and have his own team outside of the Spurs shadow, the system.
Mm-hmm.
But you bring in a player like DeMar, who's leaving Toronto. He has the ultimate chip on his shoulder, and he wants to show that he can be that for a franchise because Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
in some way turned their back on him. So
Mm-hmm.
to have DeMar there now, what is he doing? He's averaging eight plus assists. He's opening up his game in ways that we've never seen anyone.
No, it's great.
Right.
It's fantastic.
So I think to your point about the Spurs and their ability to adjust over time, I mean,
Mm.
it's a marvel. Going into the season, I had them before all the injuries to their guards. Shout out to DeJounte Murray, a player on the rise, an All-NBA defender last year,
Mm-hmm.
in only his second year.
Yep.
He ended up tearing his ACL in the last game of the season. When all these injuries started to happen, I had them above the Lakers. Then all the injuries happened. I had them dropping, barely missing the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I see the season starting to materialize and DeMar showing everything that he's showing,
Yeah.
and the market's playing off of him really well, I believe they're gonna be back in the playoffs and probably a 5-6 seed.
NBA Western Conference Finals. Who'd you have?
I mean, right now everything is centered around the Warriors. I think
Mm-hmm.
that second spot is similar to what the East is. It's like it's vacant. Before you would say Houston is the prohibited number 2. That's the tier,
Mm-hmm.
Golden State and Houston. But based on how the season is going for Houston,
Mm-hmm.
especially with their trades in the offseason and
Mm-hmm.
players leaving in free agency and losing their defensive coordinator and Jeff Bizdelic a week before training camp,
Right.
a guy who really transformed their entire defense to make them a top 10 team defensively in efficiency. All these things being considered, now Houston is struggling, and they've lost their swagger, as Mike D'Antoni has said. They're
Mm-hmm.
not getting those defensive switches like they used to.
Right.
Gordon, Carmelo Anthony on the defensive end. I
Mm-hmm.
think more than anything, losing Trevor Ariza, the way he was undervalued in that offense, because he was a selfless player that was able to be consistent.
Yes.
He was a great defender, and although he struggled in that Western Conference final, a lot of that had to do with the fact that he expended so much energy defending Kevin Durant, who's
Right.
a top 5 offensive player all time.
Yeah, I'm not sold on the Rockets, right? I mean, I think if you've got Harden and Carmelo on the floor at the time, I'm going for 40, right? Doug Marola, it's just my silky smooth jumper. I'm going to drop 40 in 3/4, right? I'm going to do a Klay Thompson, and but so that's the thing with the West. I mean, even I saw Utah play the other night,
Right.
and with Gobert in the middle, and you know me, I'm partial to guys like that, bang in the middle. He was protecting the rim, grabbing every rebound in sight, dunking on guys. He dunked on everybody.
Right.
I was really impressed. I mean, I've seen Gobert play for a few years now, but it was something else. Other teams don't have that.
Right.
And so he was really. I mean, the Jazz. I'll be there in a little bit. Yes, the Jazz look fantastic. That's my 10-year-old. So you talk about, it's interesting that you said the second seed in the West is vacant. I think you have a point.
A lot of what the West is right now is almost it's in flux in a way. You have the Lakers who have the scrutiny of LeBron there now. There's a lot going on in terms of what they can potentially be. I think on paper, people were assuming a certain number of wins because of LeBron's transcendent impact on whatever franchise he goes to. But I think considering what he has around him, it's not going to be as easy. And then we spoke about the Spurs and how, people just assume eventually it's going to come to an end. Greg Popovich has other plans. But then you have teams like Utah. I think your point about Utah in some respects has gotten a lot of respect this offseason. Many people see them as a top 3 seed in the West. And I think a lot of that had to do with Gobert's impact. His on-off numbers are tremendous. And
they're off the charts.
After him coming back from injury last year, the Utah Jazz had the second best record in the NBA. They were 30-7 over their last 37 games.
Yes, and you and I talk about this a lot because argue, bicker. Somebody like Rudy Gobert is supposedly a dinosaur. He supposedly has no space. Supposedly he doesn't exist, and everyone is going to be the Warriors. Well, I'm sorry. You have somebody like that. Look what you can do. You can now use somebody like that in the middle, who's mainly a defensive guy, put back dunks, things like that. He's not very pretty on offense, but a guy like that who can't shoot can be a frontline guy on a frontline team. The death of the big guy, I think, is totally wrong.
You see, but here's the thing. I don't think it's necessarily the depth of the big guy, but it's a certain type of big guy. I think what you're seeing now, you spoke about Denver earlier, they actually had 2 premier skilled bigs, but they had to let one go.
Yes.
In Nurkic, he actually went to Portland, and he's making his way over there.
Yep.
They have Jokic. Jokic is a player who's completely multidimensional in how he's able to score. He can shoot from the outside. He can score on the inside.
He can pass.
His defense is atrocious, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But then that's one big. Then you have Karl Anthony Towns. He's a player who can score in multiple areas.
Right.
Shoot on the outside. He's not the best passer, but his offensive game is fluid.
Yes.
You have the best big man in the league in Anthony Davis.
Yes.
He's able to shoot from the outside. He can dribble. He can create for others. He's able to impact the game defensively in ways that a lot of bigs can't.
Right. Davis has to be in the top 5 in the league. People leave him out. They'll talk about LeBron, Curry, Durant. I'm sorry. Davis has got to be in there. He's really good.
In terms of measurables, yes. And I believe he's a top 5 player.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing with Anthony Davis, and it's still coming up to as we speak because he's dealing with a sprained elbow, his durability is always going to be an issue.
Yes.
And I think for him, especially not just him, but Joel Embiid to a more extreme extent, every time they hit the ground in some way, shape, or form, you're worried because they play at such a breakneck pace and they're very frenetic in how they, sell out their body to make sure they make certain plays. Joel Embiid, I mentioned Embiid. Embiid is such a young player, but he had missed 2 years basically healing.
Yes.
Even with those missed years, he's still a dominant force.
Yeah.
He's averaging over 30 points, over 11 rebounds, over 2 blocks a game. And this is a player at 24 years old. So for the big now, it's not that they're lost, but you have to be multidimensional.
Right.
Whereas before in the 90s, you can be a big bruiser and be 7 feet, and all you had to do was get the ball in the post, take a couple of dribbles, you do a sweep through, and that was enough.
Right.
But now, especially with the way defenses have adjusted, which I want to get to that in a few seconds, the way defenses have adjusted, now you have to have a player who can stretch the floor. You have to have a player who can get passes out of a double team. And on switches, sometimes you have to go off the dribble.
Mm-hmm.
So as a big, it's not that DeAndre Jordans and Andre Drummonds aren't valuable, but they only have a certain ceiling. It's but so much you can get out of them at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. That's a good point. And we had talked about that a little bit before, where if you're going to be what we might call a classic five, a classic center, then you're going to have to be DeAndre Jordan, right? Or somebody like that, or an Andre Drummond in order to survive, unless you're a super duper star like Anthony Davis. But yeah, DeAndre Jordan, the Stifle Tower, these people are fun to watch. They're great for basketball. Yes, Capella is another one out of Switzerland. Thank you very much. And so you've got these guys who, the how the league goes through phases.
Right.
I like seeing those guys out there. I like seeing them get, swatting shots, making sure that, the rim gets protected, because you'll see other big guys who, don't do that. And they, they're stretch fours or they can shoot the three. Yeah, okay, fine. But you'll see some of these games where it was always the rap on DeMarcus Cousins, where guys will just waltz into the lane and just lay the ball right in the face because, there's no defense. Now he's an aberrant case because he does so many other things well.
On the offensive end.
Offensive end is, DeMarcus Cousins can do whatever he wants on the offensive end.
Right.
But that's another interesting case.
I think more so than anything, Clint Capella is the he is the case study for what a peak player like that, a classic big like that, can get to. While Clint Capella is not the most skilled, he's an exceptional rim runner from end to end, and he blocks shots.
And in the old days, not to interrupt, but in the old days, he was called a project.
Right.
Clint Capella's NBA career, it was touch and go there for a while.
But for him, but that's why I say it's an interesting case study, because in the right system, you can maximize his skill set.
Right.
Similar to what JaVale McGee had become with the Warriors on a lesser scale, and now on a larger scale with the Lakers.
He's playing 30 minutes a night with LA.
And could potentially, if the Lakers are able to turn it around defensively, he can get in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, because when he's on the floor, their defense is amazing. The thing about it is his on-off numbers. When he goes off the floor, they have no one to duplicate what he brings to the table.
Yeah, and it shows you, because he's not as fast as he used to be. Those Denver years when he was, and with the Wizards, when you'd see crazy highlights, those days are over.
Or low lights, depending on what.
Yeah, true, yeah. Turn off the lights. Right. Yes, but because his speed is gone a little bit, McGee isn't what he was, but because he does that, he played, it was the other night, I saw the box score, it was 32 minutes, and he was something like, 16 and 12 with 4 blocks.
Right.
And you take him out, there's no one on that roster who's doing anything like that at all.
Right.
Because it's the LeBron James, the human triple-double, doing everything, carrying the club. And, you've got JaVale McGee manning the middle, and then a cast of thousands, I think, with the Lakers trying to figure out what they're supposed to do.
But I think more so than anything, that's on the defensive end. A lot of that is coming into play on the offensive end as well.
Mm-hmm.
Their team itself, I mean, they're coached by Luke Walton, a young coach. He last year he was building a young team, and then all of a sudden the best player in the world comes to your team. So it changes your whole trajectory and how you're seen as a coach now. And I think a lot of what they anticipated last summer, not only with about getting LeBron, but they probably anticipated getting a more polished number two option. And when that didn't come to fruition, now they pieced the roster together that it was competitive and that had experience, but I'm not sure it truly complemented what LeBron's skill set is.
Is Luke Walton the coach, or is LeBron James the coach?
You see that I think it's more than just LeBron. I think LeBron and Magic are together in running the team. Whereas before you would look at it as just LeBron and you being at his whim, but I think Magic is a dominant enough personality to where he and LeBron can work together in terms of how they build this team. The thing about it is Magic is equally maniacal, similar to what Pat Riley is. And Magic, you can go back to his coaching career. He didn't necessarily have patience in terms of coaching, and I'm not sure he'll have the patience with how the results are coming about with this team. You mentioned the game where JaVale had 16. That was a game against Memphis. I mean, against Denver, where he had 16. He was playing exceptionally well.
Yes.
But if you look at all of their games, they come down to the wire because they don't have the execution necessary to close out.
Yeah, Magic coached for about 15 minutes, and that was kind of like then he was done. And if he's going to, Magic, here we are telling Magic Johnson what he needs to do. It's kind of funny to think about it.
Right.
He's Magic Johnson. If you're listening to this, you're going to need patience with that team because that's a weird setup you have. I'm a big Lonzo Ball fan. I think he's going to blossom into something Rajon Rondo-esque. Kind of like a shadow of Jason Kidd, right? One of these guys that can't shoot, but it can do a lot of other things. But that they're going to need time to gel. That's a strange group of people that the Lakers put out there.
But I mean, not more so than anything, the rotations you got to figure out who does what well, who's the better scorer, who's the better shooter. They're just trying to figure out lineups at this point.
Yeah, and it shows on the scores. You see who plays, and
one night somebody's playing 10 minutes, and another night they're playing 30.
Yeah, and starts. Yeah, so you've got a really odd setup there. What about you have Lakers and then Team X in the West, top two.
No.
I'm sorry, Golden State and Team X. Yeah, my fault.
Yeah, I think depending on how momentum swings, there's certain teams right now. Like I don't expect Houston to be this bad forever.
Right.
I don't expect Denver to stay on this high forever. But there's teams that if they can remain consistent throughout, they can challenge for that too. I think how last year 1 and 2, Houston was at 65. The Warriors were at 54, and then there was a drop off. And from 3 to 7, it was 40.
Yeah, same record.
Right. So yeah. I think it's going to be similar at the 2 seed. I think from 2 down, it's going to be similar records, but the Warriors are run away.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, based on how they're playing, Portland is playing well, Denver is playing well, and then you have sneaky teams that won't play well forever, but they're going to be spoilers throughout, and that's going to be like Sacramento. Sacramento at this point in the season, 6-3.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing exceptionally well. Their pace is through the roof. They have the youngest players in the league right now playing not only fast but uber athletic.
Right.
And those are the things that challenge old teams.
Yeah, the other end of the Cousins trade, Buddy Held. My guy Buddy Held is in there every night, trying to make it happen. They're the Kings. I looked up, almost by mistake, I was looking at the standings and I saw Sacramento there, and couldn't believe it.
Right.
I wish our Mount Vernon product, Isaiah Cousins, got drafted by the Kings a couple years ago. I'd like to see him advance.
Right.
I always think of him when I think of the Kings. They had that franchise. When I think of that franchise, but the Kings are going to be one of those teams that's going to randomly come in. Lightning is going to strike. The young guys are going to run wild, and they're going to upset somebody.
The good thing about basketball is you can't be bad forever. You can be bad for a long time, but you can't be bad forever.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that was a softball pitch over the middle for me to talk about the Knicks. But, I'm not very appreciative of that right now. But
they're competitive this year as well.
Yes, and the question is, are they going to let their star player who's injured, are they going to let him play at the end of the year or not to try to showcase him as a come play with us to all the free agents that become available, right?
Honestly, I think he's done enough in the first 3 years to show what he is.
Mm-hmm.
More so than anything, for the Knicks, in terms of their vested future, I believe they should sit him out the entire year so that next year there won't be any discussion,
right,
if he's healthy or not.
Mm-hmm.
He had a full year off. And more so than anything, when you see a team like this that doesn't have their star player, but they're competing every night,
mm-hmm.
they're playing for their coach, they're showcasing skills that maybe they wouldn't have if KP was there, Kristaps Porzingis.
Right.
That shows you how good David Fizdale is. Of course, there's going to be nights where you obviously want to win.
Mm-hmm.
But the Knicks, for the first time in a long time, are actually trying to rebuild.
Yes.
It's not, we have a song and dance about how we're going to the playoffs, but then we're in the lottery every year.
Right.
This is a true rebuild with a direction that you have to see through. And yes. I think with this particular team and this type of coach, Fizdale, what people don't understand is while Fizdale has experience as a coach, he's a relatively young coach in terms of his head coaching experience.
Right.
So you need to allow him to stretch his wings, show that he can get through the players. Can he galvanize a group? Can he get them to run through a wall for him in a way where there's going to be dog days, but can they compete still?
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that you want to test the coach with. And I think while, the cloud of Porzingis is there, I think they've done a great job of playing without addressing it. Like, they don't have it in the back of their mind. They're playing as if whatever's there, this is the team we are, and we're not playing as if we're waiting for someone.
Right, and I hope they hold on to that, because if they let all the young guys play, and then, like you said, have Porzingis come back next year, get somebody, let those guys develop, they get better, get a free agent coming in. Doesn't have to be, class AAA. It could be somebody not necessarily off the best, the top of the heap, but get a decent player in there. Now you're doing what is a rebuild, a real rebuild. The idea that you can't the old saying was you can't rebuild in New York. And I never understood that. They sell the place out every night, right? Madison Square Garden always has a lot of energy. Every player, even with the Knicks being terrible, they're like, I love playing in the Garden. It's a different kind of energy. It's classic basketball. And now they finally are trying to rebuild and not do some crazy signing and destroy the team and give away the future. But
see, the reason why that track was laid in terms of you can't rebuild in New York is because of that history. While you have talent, it's never been built cohesively. Why? Because you have an interchangeable door going back and forth of different coaches year in and year out. And then you have an owner who, while on paper that this team is not going to be good, he throws money into players that are past their prime or were never going to be peaking that way anyway. So now you're playing catch up while other teams are passing you by. You have the biggest market in the sport, not having a marquee franchise. So what's happening now is, by mistake almost, Phil Jackson, although his time with the Knicks was a putrid one, actually set up a semi-franchise player. Now, I don't believe that KP is a franchise player, but I think he's good enough and young enough
Mm-hmm.
to bring a potential franchise player there to say, I'll be the best player, but I love playing with that guy.
Right.
And while you say they might not get a marquee free agent, I think enough steam has built up to where players in particular situations, let's go back to Boston, Kyrie Irving, while Boston is exceptional right now and they're playing well, Kyrie probably wants to, while he went to Boston to potentially have his own team, what this Boston team materialized into is not what he had in mind.
Right.
This Boston team is built around a system and a nucleus of players that contribute all around.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Kyrie, by no fault of his own sometimes, wants to showcase that he can carry a team.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they speak about, players wanting to win, but they want to win on their terms. There can be a potential issue there. Like the other night, the Boston Celtics defeated the Detroit Pistons by 20 points on the road with Kyrie Irving scoring 3 points.
Yeah.
That you can't even fathom that you can't even fathom that for a franchise type player.
Right.
So now you have Kyrie coming up on free agency. I know he told everyone he's committed to Boston, but that's really a song and dance just to keep the media off of his season.
Yeah, that's his agent talking.
Right. So you have a potential signing there. Then you have what's going on in Golden State. While they are dominant, they are the best team in the league, one of the best teams ever. For a fourth championship in 5 years and 3 in a row could solidify that dynasty.
Yes.
So what's left for Kevin Durant to do? He's been the best player there, but he still has a lot to prove to himself in a sense to say he can do something outside of that particular group. So, and he wants money. So, knowing he's taken discounts the last couple of years to keep that nucleus together, what type of money will he be looking for? Obviously, he's going to want a max deal that the Warriors can't pay.
Well, remember, the Warriors won a title without Durant.
No, they did. But I'm saying when you go to that team, you can't sign a 5-year deal. You have to sign year to year.
Right.
And that's what he's been able to afford them the opportunity to do that while still keeping a $200 million player and Klay Thompson, who's going to be up for big dollars this summer as well.
Yeah, didn't he just drop 50 on somebody recently?
Well, each of them did in their own way. Kevin Durant against the Knicks last week, 41 points, 25 in the fourth quarter. Then you look at what Steph did.
Yep.
He had 51 points.
51. Yep.
And then a couple of days ago, Klay Thompson had 52 points and not even 3 quarters. He played 26 quarters.
Yeah.
26 minutes. So
right. Yeah, ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's something else. I still want to give my guy Mark Jackson credit, those young guards, and he was there. I think that whole situation with him as coach for 3 years and then going to Kerr and the system they have now was probably perfect.
Right, in terms of
those guys.
Right.
Yes.
And I want to give, honestly, I don't think Steve gets enough credit. But, I mean, I think if you really look at what they were, each coach was necessary for their time.
Mm-hmm.
Mark was there for their development in terms of making sure that they established themselves as the best shooters, as a potential young core. But it was only supposed to go but so far. Really similar to what Doug Collins did with Scottie and Michael.
Right.
Michael was Michael Jordan, but in terms of making them a preeminent contender in the East, that's what Doug Collins was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And Phil Jackson, while he's coming into an established situation, you have your two players who are all-stars, who can compete, who are trying to get over the hump. Phil takes them over the hump, but you don't have one without the other. So I think it's very similar in that regard.
Yeah. So last question before we break. In the East, I think this is a little more difficult. Top 1 and 2 seed, if you have to pick now, put money on the table. Who do you go?
I'm going Boston, Toronto. I think they're pretty much solidified because they have
not Philadelphia.
Oh, I mean, after I break down these particular two teams, the Philadelphia, the spectrum that is Philadelphia, it's a lot. Well, to answer your initial question,
okay.
Boston, Toronto are solidified at 1 and 2. I just think they're more established in what they're running. They have an idea, they have an identity, and they are consistent with that regardless of wins or losses. The rest of the teams in the East are still trying to establish themselves on a consistent tier 1 level, whether it be Indiana, who battled against Cleveland, losing in 7 games, whether it be Milwaukee, who has the best player in the conference, but still has to put the requisite players around him to play consistently at the Boston-Toronto level.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a team like Philadelphia, who's in the middle. While last year they were a number 3 seed, they probably were ahead of the curve in their development, and finishing the season 16-0 last year, winning 52 games last year, it put a spotlight on them and their core in a way where now people expect them to beat Toronto and Boston. But here's the issue. Nobody on that team had enough experience in winning and losing to truly compete with those teams. So now, when you defeat a Miami last year, it's because you're more talented than them. But when you go against a team that is equally as talented, probably a little more, now it comes down to execution. Have you been through enough wars to execute? And like we spoke about with Giannis, when you go against a Boston, they're going to exploit your flaws in a way to make you say, we know what you do. Can you beat us with what you do, or do you have a counter to challenge what we are?
Mm-hmm.
Philadelphia, while they do have Joel Embiid, whose game travels every night, he's a 30-plus point scorer, 12 rebounds. I'll mention his defensive impact. His on-off numbers are amazing. I don't care how great a big is offensively. You're always going to need a dynamic guard. Now, you're going to say to me, well, what about Ben Simmons? I love Ben. I think he's one of the best playmakers in the game. Obviously, he has a size mismatch against anyone. He is literally the closest thing to Magic Johnson that the league has ever seen.
Yes, and you can say that without getting clowned on because Simmons is that good.
Right. But here's the issue. As great as Ben is as a playmaker, as great as Ben is as a mismatch for his team on the fast break, being bigger than everyone, being 6'10", being 240, the issue with Ben is that he's never developed an offensive game to complement a player like Embiid. He's been so much bigger than everyone. He's never had to work on a jump shot. He's been so much better than everyone as a playmaker that he's had the ball in his hand his entire life, but never developed an ability to score against elite defenses. So now, when you go against a team like a Boston or a Toronto, you see us losing. I say us because I'm a huge Sixers fan.
I know.
But you see the Sixers losing to elite teams because they're exploiting Ben as a scorer. Now, you look at our other weapons in Markelle Fultz and Dario Saric and Robert Covington. These are players that can contribute.
Yes.
Haven't been in enough wars in a sense to say, I know what I do and I can do this regardless of circumstance. Against a lesser team like a Charlotte or a Clipper team, because the Sixers are better, they're going to dominate. But against elite teams that know your weaknesses and play you to that, how are they going to adjust? Saric's game, Redick's game, Covington's game, it's all predicated on shooting. But they're too streaky enough to compete on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and we talked about – I'm sorry, go ahead.
So now, when the shooting is off, you need scorers. But you really only have one scorer, and that's Embiid.
Yes.
Bigs can score, but you still need a guard who's dominant enough to be a counter to that. If for some reason the double team comes, can I throw it out to Ben to create a shot for himself? Can I give it to Markelle with the shot clock winding down to get an efficient shot? Those are things that Philadelphia doesn't have.
Right,
So that's why I don't have them with the Torontos and Bostons.
Yeah, and I think you're right because we talked about this the other day at work, and I don't know if you noticed this, but JJ Redick, who's been in the league for a while now,
Right.
is at a career high for shots taken and threes taken. He's taking more shots and more threes this year, year 2, after 5 years with the Clippers, a bunch of years with the Magic before that, his first team, cup of coffee with the Bucks. He's now career high in taking threes, because guess what? It's just what you said. They have to have someone out there who's a long distance shooting threat. And he came off the bench. He's coming off the bench. But he played 35 minutes and took a boatload of shots. So they're noticing that they need somebody to fill the void that you're talking about.
But see, that's in terms of that being the case, in terms of how the Sixers are using JJ, that is not something that can be sustainable.
Right.
Because JJ is an exceptional shooter, but shooting are streaky.
Right.
If you're not Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, you can't just call on that at any turn.
Right.
Then what makes Golden State work so well is because you have both of those players. So if at any moment, and then you have Durant. If at any moment Klay is off, which before that 52-point game, he was shooting 18% from 3. But nobody noticed because you had Durant and Curry playing so well.
Yeah, that's wild. Is that true? That's crazy. I didn't even know that.
Exactly.
I had no clue.
He was
that's insane.
Shooting horrible from 3. But but everybody assumed, well, it's Klay, he's gonna heat up soon, and he did.
Yeah.
Just imagine JJ Redick going through a cold streak. What is Philadelphia gonna do?
They're gonna lose.
Exactly. Which is why, when you have a Covington who's inconsistent at best offensively, you give him a 3-year extension worth $30+ million. He's a player that gives everything he can defensively, but you need him because of what Philadelphia is offensively. You need him to be a consistent 18 and 19-point scorer, which he's not.
Okay.
You need Sharvich to be a knockdown shooter, which when he's cold, he's definitely not.
Right.
So Philly has to, and in my opinion, in some way, shape, or form, they have to find a way to find a reliable scorer. Now, what we spoke about prior to this podcast, we were speaking relative to their age. They have time.
Yes.
While they do have time, they do have a tremendous window. You can't live on that because at any moment things can change. There will be teams that'll pass you by that you thought, oh, we had enough time to get to where we need to get to. So I think there has to be a plan in place to either work away. You might not get a Jimmy Butler, you didn't get a Kawhi, but you have to figure out how to find a guy who can get you 20 to 25 points a night.
Yes. I think of somebody like Tyreek Evans, somebody like who was his running mate in Sacramento in the early days? A pure scorer. I'm blanking on his name, but it was Tyreek Evans, and there was another guy with Sacramento who bounced around the league for a while, who was just like a modern-day Reggie Theus, who you put him on the floor and he'll score 20 points.
Oh, Thornton?
No, it wasn't him. It'll come to me. But it's one of those guys where, like, look, we need you to just fill it up.
Right. If they like last night they played the Clippers.
Kevin Martin, right? I mean, what did Kevin Martin do other than score 20? I mean, other than score 23 points a night.
I mean, literally, that's all he did, though.
Yes. But imagine him on the Sixers now.
Right, or even Lou Williams right now.
Yes, right.
Well, Lou Williams is a player who's at this point he's third all time in points off the bench. He's behind Del Curry and Jamal Crawford. But
Del Curry had a son.
Yeah. Well, two sons. One of them are.
One of them's in Portland.
Yeah.
Coming off the bench.
Yeah. The other's just some guy.
Some guy in the Bay Area. Give me a few minutes. I'll think of who it is.
Is he in Sacramento? What team's doing?
I don't know. You know more with this stuff than I do. He's somewhere.
It'll come to me.
Yeah.
But Del Curry, he's first all time in bench scoring.
Right.
Lou Williams is third right now.
Lou Williams is third all time. That's wild.
And he's still in his prime.
Mm-hmm.
A player like that who actually started his career with the Sixers.
Yes.
On that particular team, they just need a guy that they know they can go to get a bucket.
Mm-hmm.
for Philly right now, you have the likes of, I mentioned Milwaukee. And Milwaukee destroyed Philadelphia in Milwaukee, and Embiid had close to 35 points.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that just goes to show you the type of momentum teams can build up against Philadelphia if things go wrong.
Right.
And I feel like for the Eastern Conference, like we were talking about as we got started, it's so wide open now. It's so wide open with LeBron leaving that anyone can take the crown.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So,
great conversation, man. Thank you.
Yes. Definitely, we got to do this again soon. Our legions of fans demand nothing more and nothing less from us.
Definitely great content as always. We'll be sure to get back together throughout the season with more content. This is Isaiah Rhodes on Ask Isaiah. I'm with the Freelance Teacher. Where can they find you?
Right now, the best place is my travel site. We're gearing up for a trip to Peru, tfttravelgroup.com, and I'm on all the usual social media sites as well.
Thank you for your time. Freelance Teacher Douglas Marola. I'm Isaiah Rhodes, Ask Isaiah, NBA podcast. We'll be back with much more. Peace.
Got it.